Hello, good morning and welcome to LandShark. What we're going to do today is we're going to try to replace the inner liner and the impeller. So we'll walk through the process of doing that. First thing you got to do is make sure that the plugs are unplugged so that it's not going to start, just in case you have gas in it. So we'll take those out. Should be turned off as well. Okay, next thing we're going to do is take the front cover off, 9/16. Get them all loose. Just get everything loose. Try to speed it up. Okay, so we got the cover off. Now we're exposed to the impeller. So you have the shark tooth, which has a center bolt, and you have 6 bolts around the outside. 3 of them will have X's on them. Those 3 are the ones that are torqued and Loctited for pulling the compression bushing into the hub. The non-X'd bolts are just dummy bolts that hold in the hub to keep the debris out of the threads so that you can pull this off when you need to replace it. We recommend that you double check your impeller every couple years. They do wear out, and also the liners wear out, so they're all replaceable, and that's what we're doing today. Okay, so center bolt. We have about an 8-inch block that we're going to put in, and we're typically going to wedge that in between the head of the bolt inside. Maybe I can break it, maybe not. So this bolt would be torqued and Loctited in to make sure that it doesn't come out. Okay, that's off. Now we're into the bolts inside. Those are all 1/2 inch. So what we want to do is take one out at a time, one set. I'm going to take the dummy bolt out. That should expose the bushing behind it. Take out one of the torqued ones. So that's a longer bolt and it's going back into the bushing. If you've threaded in here, it's going to thread through the hub to the back of the bushing, and I'll show you that once we take it out. So I'm going to finger tight that one in, and I'm going to do that all the way around. And I've got the torqued bolts back in the dummy bolt holes. So now this is putting pressure on the back side of the bushing, and I'm going to go around on about 1/8 of a turn on each one and just start putting pressure on it very slowly around each bolt. And I'm going to keep going around and around, and I don't want to put a lot of pressure on. I want this thing to be evenly torqued as we're pulling it out. So that's going to put pressure on evenly on the back of that bushing, and it should push it out of the hub. Okay, so it actually, as I was torquing these, it actually heard a little bit of a pop, and it released on one of the bolts, but I'm only moving them just ever so slightly, and this one's loose, so I'm going to bring that one up, bring this one up. It's starting to push it out now. So I'm just kind of working my way around, and I've already broke it loose, so I'm okay with turning these more than just an 1/8 of a turn or less, because I wanted to make sure that it broke free first. And if you look in here, you can actually see it moving with this bolt. the distance in here is starting to grow as I push that out now. So it's loose enough to where all of them are working. So now I'm going to take the block out. I'm going to take the impeller off, and that's going to slide right out. Turn it, angle it so it comes out, and that's it. This is what a good impeller should look like. All the teeth are nice and solid, nothing worn off. So now we've got the bushing off, got the impeller off the bushing. This is a taper lock bushing, and it compresses on the shaft. That's what holds the impeller on, and it's keyed. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is take the liners out. The liners have just bolts in them. We'll loosen those all up and get those. Each one is, there's two sides. We'll talk about that once we get ready to put the new ones back in, but I'll take those out next. We spring load these things so that they have tension inside. We don't want them coming loose and causing any problems inside, so they will have some tension on them. And I'll kind of explain what to do with that as we go through it. But right now I'm ready to just take off the hardware. So I'm trying to do my best to keep the piles of hardware separate, so I know which ones go back into where. Okay, this is the first liner. And this one is definitely spring loaded. So I'm removing the hose hanger bracket. Make sure I got all my hardware picked up. Okay, so it was a little challenging taking them out because they're all brand new and they're not worn out. But this is what it looks like. There's two of them. You got a short one and you got a longer one, and the longer one has a straight edge. That's the way they're going to go back in, and you want to put the smaller one in first, and you kind of work it in and around, and it'll kind of squeeze in. So you're going to slide them in. up. And then you just kind of got to work it in. Pop in. Then I put 2 bolts in the end. So this will be where the 2 join together, and they'll have a seam here, so you want to get them in there to position them to where they do that, fit together. Okay, so there should be 4 long bolts and a bunch of shorter bolts. The 4 long ones are going to go in specific places. So you have 2 wire brackets, wire retainers that are holding on here. That's going to be long bolts, and then these are going through extra material, so they also need to be the long bolts. As you put this small liner in, it may or may not be up tight against here. It's going to come down inside. This is where we would use a bar clamp and go in from the top, hook on the bottom, and just draw them up together and then put the bolts in. That makes it a little bit easier for assembly. Okay, so I put the small one in and I put 4 bolts in it so that it slides up and down, because we're going to fit these 2 together, and we want the gap to be small and they don't overlap. So the next one goes in. This one will go in easier than the little one did. So I want to get it down to the bottom, and I want to put the hardware in the bottom one. This and this washer and nut on it. So I'm just finger tightening everything, and then there's a gap between the 2 pieces. We're going to work to bring those together as all of these fit in. And I held off putting the top in because I wanted to be able to rotate. Okay, so I put the liners in, and rather than watch me putting them in, I just wanted to get them done so it doesn't take the video too long. We put them in. I pushed this one, the bigger one, up, and I got it snugged in just finger tight, and then I tightened this bolt. That brought the liner down against the housing and allowed this one, I pushed this one up to make sure that it wasn't underneath, and I held it up while I tightened this up, and that sets the gap here. So now they're just butted against each other and sitting there. So I will go in and I'll tighten everything up, but this one's starting to snug up, but we got to put the top ones in, and again, those are a little bit longer. So when I put it in, it does not fit. I'm not going to be able to get hardware on there, so that's where the bar clamp comes in. So we just take a short bar clamp. You can use pretty much any clamp you want. Get it down in there. Put it underneath the liner. On the bottom, that liner's sitting about right in here, so I just got it hooked on there, and I got it hooked on the top. And all I'm going to do is just thread that up, and what it'll do is it'll compress that liner a little bit to where I can get hardware on and come up through the hole. Hopefully. The holes aligned up a little better. So now when I put it on, I got plenty of room for it. As you put this one in, I'll be able to get the hardware on. Okay, so I got the liners in. Next thing I'm going to do is all the hardware is in and has the nuts and washers on them, so I'm just going to go in and tighten everything up, and then we'll be ready to put the impeller back in. Okay, we've got the liners in. What I did was I went through and tightened everything up, and then I went back through and did one more double check to make sure that everything was snug. I lined the cable across, the safety cable across, and made sure that the wire clamps are holding it nicely straight. That'll give you more room back here when you go to put it back together. So we're ready to go back with a new impeller. Typically on an impeller, you're looking at probably 30 pounds of metal hanging off the end of the shaft. It's always highly recommended that you change this bushing. If you do that, when you do that, there's a set screw in the top, and that sets into the key stock in here. You want to set this back about 5/8 from the face of the engine shaft and lock that in place. That sets the impeller. In the impeller you've got open holes and you've got threaded holes. We're going to hit the threaded holes with the threaded bolt going through the open holes in the hub. And the dummy bolts will be installed and they should be tightened, so you shouldn't have any issue with that. So we're going to put the impeller back in and we're going to try to align it so that the open holes hit the threaded holes. So try to take note as you're putting it in where those are. Somewhere about there. So this is probably the most important part of your whole machine, is making sure that this is on right. We always put Loctite on the bolts, holding them in. So that's going to go in. We're going to hit that hole back there and slide it up. Try to get it started. And as we put each bolt in, we're going to make sure that it's threading in nicely. And we're going to tighten them probably about a quarter turn. Once you get them in and they start snugging up, you want to torque them about a quarter of a turn each one to try and draw this uniformly onto the bushing onto the hub. So each one will get pulled just quarter turns on the 3 bolts, and that'll draw that in nice and uniform, and that will compress this bushing on the gap onto the shaft, and that's what holds this in place. And I just went around and I just hand tightened them in to draw the hub and the bushing together, and I just wanted to get them snug against the lock washers. Then I'm going to change over. I set the torque wrench to 22 foot-pounds, and I'm going to go around and start torquing them in. Use your block to set the impeller so that it doesn't turn. And now I'm going to start snugging them up as I go around, maybe a quarter of a turn. And just a caution, these studs are sticking out. You're going to catch your finger on it, so watch what you're doing there. And just kind of work your way around. Quarter turns, quarter turns. nice and slow. That was a little loose, so we can pull that in, pull that in. And a good rule of thumb is I'm going between the studs for how much I'm turning at each time. So we've already hit one of the stops up there. So the other one should be getting close. Okay, so I hit all the stops, hit the torque setting on all the bolts, and I went through it about 3 or 4 times, because as you make any adjustment here, it's going to loosen these up a little bit until it pulls it in tight. Now it's pretty securely attached, so I don't think it'll be an issue, and you can hear them as I go around. That one's clicking and it's not turning at all anymore. It clicks, no turn, clicks, no turn. So that's secure. Then we're ready for the shark tooth. Again, Loctite the bolt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it, run the bolt all the way in, and I'm going to kind of center this to the holes and make sure that those all center where they're supposed to be. Okay. This one we're going to adjust up to 58 foot-pounds. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Extension. Going to hold that in place while I tighten this up. Okay, so I got the center bolt torqued to the 58 foot-pounds, 22 foot-pounds on the bolts that pull the bushing and hub together. And then last step is make sure you take your block out, and we put a strap on it so we remember to do that. It gets in the way when you're putting the cover back on. So now it's ready for the cover to swing back into place. And that will go on here. We've got the wire retention to go on that one, and then it's just putting all the hardware on and tightening everything up. So we'll get back to the end of the video here directly as soon as I put all these on and torque them up tight. And I've tightened everything up. I went back and double tightened everything, made sure everything was snug. When you're putting this wire back together, you want to make sure that the wire retainer is kind of angled down so that this is tucked back in a little bit. That's good. The last step that I have was put the spark plug wires back on, make sure they're good and snug. Anytime you're changing out parts on a machine, we use lock nuts on everything that we do on the machines. Okay. If you've changed them out more than 1 or 2 times, you want to go back and replace them because the neoprene does wear out on them. That's just a safety issue for you. Make sure that none of the bolts go up in and it gets chunked in the impeller. That will be bad for the impeller as well. If you have any questions, give us a call. We're here at LandShark, answer any questions you have. Thanks for watching the video.